Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And welcome to this week's preview for the upcoming football opponent, and that is the Houston Cougars, who've had a complicated season, I think is probably the best way to put it. But before we dive straight into the scouting report for Houston, we do want to thank the sponsors of the show. That is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma.
Thank you, Grandma.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the supporters link in our podcast and Twitter bios. But let's dive straight in to the Houston Cougars, who are 3-5 with a 2-3 Big 12 records, either 2-3 or 2-4.
2-3.
And the wins they've had are they destroyed Rice, they beat TCU pretty convincingly, actually, and then eked by Utah in their most recent game. So, their three losses or their three victories were, against, one team that was supposed to be really good, Rice, and then TCU. But outside of those games, they've had a very rough season. 27-7 loss to UNLV to open it, 16-12 loss to Oklahoma, and we figured out Oklahoma is actually kind of poo-poo. Two straight shutout losses to open conference play against Cincinnati and Iowa State, and then getting destroyed by KU. So again, their schedule hasn't, or their games to this point haven't been particularly kind to them. And their full disclosure, there is one reason and one reason only why I personally am afraid of this team. It's because the head coach is Willie Fritz. And I'm pretty sure that man could coach a Pop Warner team to eventually beat like an FCS school. Like he is one of the best coaches in the country in terms of motivating. And coming off of a win or both of us coming off of a win, both being highly emotional, someone's bound for a letdown game, and there's only one team going in with expectations. So,
yeah, I'm similarly fairly worried about this game, although we're kind of at the point in the season where with the stakes for K-State going forward, every game I'm going to be pretty worried no matter who we're playing, honestly, because we're going to get everybody's best shot from here on because we're top of the conference or near the top, that is. And this Houston team, again, last year we blew them out, but they have a much better coach in Willie Fritz. Despite having deficiencies here and there, they still have proven that on any given night, they can at the very least give another team a run for their money, if not win. So, this is a game that's very easy for K-State to overlook, but we just cannot afford to.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And that can sort of lead us into the offensive scheming. And if there is a strength to this team, it is certainly much closer to being their defense because, their offense isn't good.
Yeah, this is a team that is trying to find its offensive identity. They've done a much better job of that as of late, but this overall lack of identity, though, has led to them having the only 126th ranked offense in the country at just a hair over 300 yards per game, which there are somewhere in the 130s for FBS schools. So
there are 133 FBS schools.
Yeah, so they are in the bottom 10 in the country in yards per game offensively. So not good company that they are keeping with their total yardage.
No. And if you look at their stats just based on their schedule, they have had 3 games on the year where they had fewer than 75 yards passing. And they have yet to have a 100-yard rusher in a game, and they have yet to have a 100-yard receiver in a game. So, and some of that early was definitely, they didn't really know what their identity was. Their identity now is, I'm not even going to say it's more concrete, but at least they know a general idea, which you can get into now.
Yeah, they run a good mix of formations. They have a more tightly wound 12 personnel to some true 5 wide spread looks. But again, a lot of this comes down to them experimenting to see what works and what doesn't work for them. More recently, they've stuck with a more of a true spread 11 personnel offense to try and complement their quarterback running game, which we'll talk about here in a minute.
Yeah, one of their top players, at least going into this season, is a tight end. His name escapes me, which tells you that he's not on our list of notable players to watch because, yeah. But at the beginning of the season, they definitely seemed like they wanted to be a more 12 personnel, sort of like a Baylor, where they wanted to run the ball, and that was their main priority. Excuse me. Now their main priority is still running the ball, but running the ball in a different way and focusing more on the spread running game with the option, which coincides with their, I don't even really want to call it a 2-quarterback system because it's not. It's kind of just whoever has the quote unquote hot hand at the moment is in the game. But yeah, they've moved to a lot more spread as of late in order to complement the quarterback running game.
Yeah. As for talking about their running and passing splits, Houston, they only pass the ball 42% of the time. And their running game has relied a lot on the option as of late. They run zone at almost double the rate that they run power or counter. So a lot of pressure is put on their running backs to find the right hole to run through. And they also rotate a ton in the running back room. They don't have a single player on the roster right now with over 300 yards from scrimmage this year. In fact, they have a couple guys that are close with Rashawn Sanford at 294 and Stacy Snead at 277. But I mean, yeah, they've got 3 running backs on this roster with over 30 carries and 2 with over 50 carries. So they definitely don't have any issues spreading the ball to various running backs in the backfield. That doesn't even account for Zion Chris, their quarterback, who's run it 49 times in his own right. So they definitely looking to run the ball. They've run the ball about 100 more times than they've passed this year.
Yeah. And again, the running backs, neither of them made the cut for notable offensive players, but I do think that both of them are pretty respectable in terms of running backs. I don't think that either of them are, like Big 12, like all Big 12 team contenders, and that's no disrespect to them. It's just that the Big 12 quietly has some of the best collection of running backs in the country. But what their biggest trait is their speed. Both of them are really, really fast backs. And I think that's sort of why they shifted towards the more spread running game, as well as, trying to cater towards Chris's strengths. But the next few stats that you're about to read, Connor, perhaps encapsulate this offense better than any other stat.
Yeah, this gets into their third down stats. This is there's really not a generous way to put it. This team is just putrid on third down. They're bottom 10 in the country with conversion rate at only 28%, just absolutely awful. And then they are dead last in the FBS in the red zone. They're only scoring 53% of the time in the red zone and only 26% ending in touchdowns. They're the worst in the country in the red zone. And the numbers are just like horrid to even look at, honestly. Like I feel like physically ill knowing that a team can be this bad in the red zone.
Yeah, and there, like you said, there's no dancing around it. This is the worst team in the red zone that we have seen statistically, just purely statistically, not even based on vibes. This is numbers. If me reading numbers jinxes us, we're screwed. But just statistically, this is the worst red zone offense that we have faced in the history of us doing the show. And it's not even particularly close. And a lot of that is, obviously things get more difficult in the red zone. And although they've found a bit of an identity with the more spread-based running game, that's a lot more difficult to execute in the red zone if you don't have one guy who's like, okay, I can rely on, this tight end or this outside wide receiver. Like you can't force conflicts as much in the red zone, which
Yeah, which I mean, like their scoring woes. I mean, like when a team's that bad in the red zone, you're just going to struggle to score. I mean, they've only eclipsed 20 points 2 times on this season, which both of those actually got to 30, 33 against Rice, and then somehow they got 30 at TCU. But I mean, this is a team that has really, 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 really struggled to score the ball and somehow continues to do so even when they make it to the red zone. I can't recall a time that we've covered a team that's even been below 30% on third downs conversion rate. And that 26% touchdown rate is pretty abysmal. So even though they are doing some things right, and they've gotten better as the season has gone on, there are still some things where it's just eye-popping.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it is
Yeah, but I guess that takes us into some of their passing game numbers. In that passing game, both quarterbacks hover around 30% play action and a 20% screen rate. They have a few concepts that they've run all season long, most notably a drag dig combo that's meant to stretch the linebacker into making a bad choice, and your classic slot out and outside goes. The problem is they really lack a major vertical presence in the offense, so that makes some of those concepts a lot more difficult to execute consistently for Houston.
Yeah, because a lot of they ran somewhat similar concepts with Dana Holgerson, who, fun fact, is now at TCU, which is crazy for me to think about. But they ran there are a few residual concepts, but they really are missing. I think it's is Golden the fourth? I don't remember his first name. He transferred
Matthew
to Texas.
Golden.
Matthew Golden. Thank you. Yeah, they're really missing him on the outside. And although they still have Manjack the fourth, who's a wide receiver who doesn't wear gloves because, sure, and he's still a really solid receiver. It's just they don't have that same vertical presence that they had under Dana Holgerson last year. And I think people are forgetting that was a big part of what made Houston last year capable of winning any games was they at least had a vertical presence. And Donovan Smith could do one thing very, very well. That man could throw the deep ball. And that's why he, at the beginning of the season, was sort of a low-key, this guy's going to get drafted type of quarterback. And he went from that to being benched, which now leads us into the notable players, which for the first time this year, we get to talk about two quarterbacks.
Yeah, their QB situation is really, really strange. Honestly, is the best way to put it. But they've got two guys, one of whom already named Donovan Smith. He's been around the block for a long time. We faced him several years ago, back when he was at Texas Tech. And then he makes his way to Houston. We saw him last year. in a Houston uniform. But they also have another guy now named Zeon Chris. So we've seen both of these players get very significant snaps, particularly Chris as of late. But Donovan Smith has been one of the probably the biggest casualties of a scheme change that we've seen in the history of doing this show. He went from being a quarterback that, while mistake prone, was actually sneaky good, and he had his moments and even had some upside. But he's now this year he's thrown double the amount of interceptions as he's thrown touchdowns, 4 touchdowns to 8 interceptions this year. But despite that, he's still their leading passer, and he's shown some flashes of what made him a solid quarterback to begin with a good arm, with a plus ability to get his team out of some sticky situations, so long as he is not creating them.
And that's sort of been the problem with Donovan Smith this year, is he hasn't been given the opportunity. And maybe this is me, trying to stick to confirmation bias about Donovan Smith, because I always kind of thought that I'm not going to say always, because I didn't think he was very good at Texas Tech. But as soon as he got to Houston, I always thought that, he was like a top half of the Big 12 quarterback pretty much his entire time that he was there. And then this year, it's just all fallen apart for him. And I do think it goes back to a mixture of, not having that vertical presence, as well as the offensive line not being as good because, they don't have a second-round pick in Patrick Paul. And Donovan Smith has been sacked 17 times in 8 games, so just a little over 2 sacks a game, which is not where you want to be. And that's despite the fact that they have one of the best pass-blocking left tackles in the Big 12. There's a lot about this Houston team that just kind of – there's so much that makes sense, but there's an equal amount that just doesn't. And Donovan Smith's regression, I'm not even – he was better when he was a freshman at Texas Tech. This is the worst version of Donovan Smith that we've seen. And I don't think it's because he's a bad player at all. I think it's just because this is not the scheme for him. This is absolutely not the scheme for Donovan Smith.
Yeah, he has just had a absolutely brutal season. There's really no way around it. But a pretty unfortunate decline for a quarterback that already did have some struggles here and there. But that takes us into the next quarterback, and that's Zeon Chris, and he's a lot less complex. He's a mobile quarterback that has a well above average arm, below average arm, and that limits it. I was about to say, I was like, I think I disagree with that, but I'm going to roll with it anyways.
Yeah.
A well below average arm that limits his ability to fit the ball into tight windows or have any vertical element to the offense. He has great speed at the quarterback position and has the ability to extend plays, but he is not a good passer whatsoever. And that is kind of exemplified. I mean, even in his raw stats aren't good. He's averaging only 5.6 yards per attempt and has a 1-to-1 touchdown interception ratio.
And his long is 28 yards.
Yeah, so some not good numbers there, at least passing the ball for Zeon Chris. He does have over 200 rushing yards with a long of 71, so he does have some good long speed, but passing, not great.
Who was the UCF backup last year?
Timmy McClain.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of a right-handed Timmy McClain, except for Timmy McClain even had a better arm than Zeon Chris, and Zeon Chris is also not as good of an improviser, which Timmy McClain, that man could do one thing. That man could improvise. Zeon Chris takes the improvisation ability, and he's just a pure running quarterback. And that really puts the offense in a bind because that 9 times out of 10, if Zeon Chris is the quarterback, they're probably running the ball and specifically running an option. And if Donovan Smith is in the game, yeah, he's had a few reps where he's run the option, but they've sort of made the executive decision that Donovan Smith is not as effective at running the option. So they just decided to go with the 2 quarterback system, which doesn't make any sense to me in a vacuum. And to me, it just kind of reeks of the, we have to get a spark going somehow, some way. And, I can't say it's worked, but I can't say it's not worked. I could say that they've been about the same. They've been basically the same team statistically, they're completely different teams with the people under center, but statistically they've gotten the same results.
Yeah. Zion Chris, not an enviable situation for him, and Donovan Smith, kind of the same story, but Chris, I guess you could argue, is maybe the bigger threat for no other reason than he does have really great mobility, but his arm is just so limited. So it's tough to say. But that takes us into another notable player they have on offense. That's David Dukwe. While his run blocking is not very good, his pass blocking reps have all been really exceptional this year. He's given up one pressure the entire season, and a lot of that comes down to his ability to just anchor against a pass rush and also just not let anything get behind him. So he's a very quality blindside blocker for these Houston quarterbacks. It hasn't helped a ton, but he, at the very least, is a productive member of this offensive line and somebody to worry about.
Which I don't understand how Houston went from Patrick Paul to David Dukwe, because they both are just elite pass blocking left tackles who aren't good at run blocking. But I mean, at least under Dana Holgorsen, that sort of tackle made a lot more sense. But yeah, David Dukwe is a really, really good player, and it's not someone that you'll hear mentioned very often. There are two players that are on this team that I think probably deserve at least honorable mention all Big 12, but probably won't because they're on Houston. And the other one's on defense, but Dukwe is very, very solid as well. He averages out to be really solid. Pass blocking, exceptional. Run blocking, no. But it averages out to be above average.
Yeah, that takes us to the last notable players, or it's more of a notable group here. All their receivers are pretty solid and have some decent height. The exception is Mekhi Muse, who is a slot gadget guy. But they do have some solid receivers. Stephon Johnson is a pretty good receiver. Joseph Manjack IV, who, beyond having a great name, does play without gloves, which is just absolutely nuts. I don't remember the last time I've seen that from a wide receiver. But on top of all of it, he's actually a pretty decent receiver. He started his career at USC, I believe.
Yep,
he did. Houston. So there is some good receiving talent on this team. Malik Carr might have been the tight end that you were talking about earlier.
It was.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but he's someone that we'll at least need to worry about. But yeah, that first rotation of receivers that they have with Stephon Johnson, Joseph Manjack, and Mekhi Muse, those are all solid guys that we'll need to worry about.
Yeah, and like I said, this room is just sort of missing that vertical presence, because all of those guys are really, really solid, either contested catch or possession guys, but none of them sort of put the fear of God in you that you need for a defense to sort of get out of their one high structures to stop the running game. Which, if you're running a spread, if you're running a spread running system, you need to do that. you need that vertical presence for this specific scheme that they've sort of shifted to, and they just don't really have it. And again, it's exactly what you said. These guys are not bad receivers. I actually think they're pretty solid to good, but it's just they don't have. It's kind of like the problem that K-State had for a while, where they just didn't have the burner on the outside that could just cook people deep, but they still had some okay route runners and possession receivers. That's very similar to what this Houston team is. In fact, I'd honestly say that this Houston team is better than a lot of those, or at least the receiving room is better. But Yeah, all in all, the offense just doesn't have it hasn't solidified an identity as of yet. It's starting to get there, and I think that if this is around the time that I think they could start picking up the pieces for it, especially with how Willie Fritz is known to sort of motivate teams to get going and figuring things out on the fly. I mean, granted, this is only year one of Willie Fritz, and I think Tulane was what, 2-10 his first year,
Something like that, yeah.
and he's arguably inheriting a worse situation at Houston than he was at Tulane, because just about everyone that was worth keeping left, and just schematically he doesn't have the right players for it. But I don't know. There's something about this Houston offense that it's just the moment that they just sort of commit to an identity, I think that they would improve. I'm not saying that they'd be like world beaters, but I do think that a lot of their struggles come down to being very experimental, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And by the way, I looked at Willie Fritz's record. His first season in Tulane, 2016, was 4-8. However, he did go 2-10 the year before we played them, so he went from 2-10 to 12-2 in a single off season, which is just absolutely absurd. And the fact that he also did that after really being average for 5 years. At Tulane, to then having that one bad season, then 12-2, 11-2. It's pretty unbelievable for Willie Fritz.
Yeah, and that's after years at, I think it was the D2 level.
Yeah, he since we're doing this now, he started at junior college as his first head coaching job was at Blinn for 4 years, and then he spent looks like 13 seasons at Central Missouri in the MIAA, and then 4 years at Sam Houston State, 2 at Georgia Southern, then 8 at Tulane, and now he's in his first year at Houston.
I didn't think he was going to leave Tulane, honestly.
I didn't either. I'm really shocked. I guess I'm happy he did, because I would not have wanted to go face another Willie Fritz Tulane team down in New Orleans. Yeah, so I guess it probably worked out for the best. I would prefer he go somewhere that we don't ever have to see him again, but unfortunately, that's where the chips fell. So maybe there's still time to kick Houston out for out of the conference, but we'll see.
But now we can move on to the defense, which is, of the two units, the better on the team. And I would actually say that their defense borders on solid.
Yeah, they definitely don't have the same identity crisis that the offense does. That makes them a top 25 unit in the country by yardage statistically, even though they are in the mid 50s in scoring. So, which to me that says that they're very often being gifted bad field position by their offense due to.
You would be correct.
Very stout, but only so much you can do whenever you have one of the lesser offenses in the entire country.
Yeah, you would be exactly correct. The offense does the defense absolutely no favors on a mixture of turning the ball over, bad special teams play, which isn't the defense's fault, and just really, really poor field position. And despite that, they're still only like mid 50s in terms of scoring with constant short fields. So I say that they're bordering on solid. You could make a pretty convincing argument that the defense is in a way underrated, which I wouldn't, but I think you could make a pretty convincing argument that they are.
Yeah, I mean, you look up and down their schedule, and most of their blowouts are from lack of points. And the only game where they have given up more than 40 points is their game at KU a couple of weeks ago. And that was a game where KU got I think 4 interceptions.
It's
Now,
4 interceptions and I think 2 pick-sixes.
yeah, so KU really kind of ran it up on Houston off the back of some defensive scores on that one. Other than that, their most points they given up was 34 to Cincinnati, but they also did hold Iowa State to 20, which Iowa State's offense has been kind of up and down, but they're certainly a talented team. And that's maybe a bit of a surprising number to look at, particularly with how highly ranked Iowa State is. But no, this is in terms of holding opponents, the defense they're really doing about all they can, honestly. So this is a stout unit they'll have to worry about. But that takes us into more scheme. They run a hybrid 4-2 that we've gotten very used to seeing. It's really so similar to a lot of the others that we see that it's hardly worth even mentioning or really getting that deep into, because this is not a particularly unique front that have in this conference.
No, we're used to seeing this front.
Yeah, and in coverage, though, they are a much better zone team than they are a man team. The majority of their man coverage snaps are blitzing situations where they are definitely going to be sending a lot of heat, but much more zone than man from this Houston defense.
And it's a lot of off-zone stuff. So, and they are really good. This is one thing that I'll give them a lot of credit for. They are very good at disguising their cover 2s as a cover 4, which is a very unique and strange skill set to have, I guess, because normally you can disguise those, but there are a lot of tells that get pretty obvious for it. But they're pretty solid at off-zone coverages in particular, and a lot of what allows them to play off-zone coverages, especially their cover 3 looks, is their primary safety. And their primary safety should probably be first team all Big 12.
Yeah, that takes us to talking about him. That's AJ Halsey. He's quietly been one of the best safeties in the entire conference. He's got 6 passes deflected and 4 interceptions on the year. And his best attribute is his insanely quick reaction times and ability to get across the hashes in coverage to undercut routes and get the interception. He's no slouch when it comes to tackling either. He's the second leading tackler in a defense that lacks a little bit of star power. So Halsey really, he's a genuine standout on this team.
I think you could honestly make an argument that Halsey is the best individual defensive player that we have seen the entire season. And I don't say that lightly. Especially coming off of last week where, as much as I do like dumpstering on KU, which, trust me, that's one of my favorite pastimes, Kobe Bryant and Romello Dotson are both very, very good players. We've seen a lot of really solid defensive players throughout our time in this season. Halsey might be the single best individual performer, and I'm not really even sure how close it is. And that he's a problem. He near single-handedly makes the defense work in pass coverage. That's very hard to do as a free safety. And he really is that good. The only other person that I could think of that would have competed with him was if Nick Martin was healthy for Oklahoma State. Those two are on the same tier to me.
Yeah, so really high praise for AJ Halsey, and somebody that we're going to have to keep our eyes on. We cannot be making too many mistakes around him, or he's going to make us pay. This is a game we just cannot afford any unforced errors. But that takes us to the other notable player on defense, and that's Michael Batten. He's a transfer from ULM. Raw. Very much the vacuum of this defense, and that he just gets tackles and he gets some sacks as well. He leads the team in both of those categories. And a lot of that is because he just plays with his hair on fire and knows where to get and is able to get there. He's very effective instrument, I suppose, for this defense. But he, along with Halsey, I mean, those two are really the heart of this defense.
That reminds me a lot of, I think there was Darius Robinson from the Tulane team, where what he didn't have in terms of, pure technical prowess or coverage skills, he more than made up for with just constantly being in the area and constantly getting tackles, because A, his motor is ridiculous, and B, he's just fast enough to where he's always going to be involved in one way or another. And that's impressive stuff as a defensive player. So yeah, it's really, those two are the heartbeat of the defense. That is, like I said, I think it's at least a little bit underrated, at least statistically, if you look at the stats compared to perception, because I think the perception of, and now we can move into more general points. I think the perception of this Houston team of sort of being this, up to this point, this sort of doormat team that, you can put up a lot of points on, their offense isn't going to do much. I think that's being really disingenuous to the team as a whole, because, I still believe that they are a team that could go out and, like, even if they have an all right day, if they get overlooked, they're going to punish you. That's pretty much exactly what happened to Utah. And Utah's quarterback situation, say what you will about it, but that's still probably a game that on paper, Utah should have walked away from pretty convincingly with a victory. But they, one way or another, Houston stunned them, whether it be that Utah overlooked them or Houston's turning a corner, who's to say. But while I struggle to say that this Houston team has truly turned a corner into being this, sort of tier, because to be abundantly clear, they are sort of in that lowest tier of Big 12 schools right now, but they're not in their own tier alone. Like they're still in a tier that they can threaten you, and they will threaten you if you give them even the slightest bit of a chance.
Yeah, that is something that we need to remain concerned about. I mean, this is we've been saying all episode, but it's still worth mentioning that Willie Fritz is a really great motivator as a head coach, and it truly does not matter this team is 3-5 because, I mean, they probably feel that they should have a better record than they do, and you could maybe even make that argument because they were right there with Oklahoma up until pretty much the very end of that game. And UNLV has turned out to be a better team than they thought, but I think they probably think that they're a better team than they're largely given credit for. Even though their offense has struggled, their defense is really holding teams to a point where if the offense just gets out of the gutter, then this all of a sudden becomes a team that you really don't want to play that badly. Because, I mean, the offense is averaging just over 300 yards a game, but the defense is only allowing 318 yards a game. Yards per play, the offense is only getting 5, but the defense is only getting up 5.4. So the defense is keeping this team competitive for the most part. So that's something that we have to worry about, because if this team just picks a day to turn the corner, it could very easily be us that end up being the ones that overlooked Houston and allowed them to course correct their season.
In a lot of ways, I'm very happy that Utah lost to Houston, because if they're coming off of a victory, that makes them a lot harder to ignore. And I'm not saying that the K-State roster or the coaching staff are dumb enough to overlook anybody. I am saying that subconsciously, if you look at a team that's, 2-6, you're like, they're fighting. Like, the only thing that they're fighting for is, perhaps bowl eligibility if they win out. That is not how you should treat this Houston team. Absolutely not. because yes, they're 3-5, and that's probably a deserved 3-5. Like it's not even a KU like 2-5, now 2-6, where it's a bunch of one possession games. And no. They have earned the losses that are on their schedule. They've earned those. However, that does not mean that they're this abysmal garbage tier team that you can just show up and beat. No. Utah thought they could do that. Utah thought incorrectly. So I think we can start to get into the more general stories and questions. And I think the most important one is, like I said, I don't think K-State is overlooking this team. However, they are coming off of probably one of the most emotional, at least for us, victories in quite some time. And they're still a very young team on offense. So I wonder how they respond on the road with all of that in mind.
Oh, yeah, this is a big moment for this team because, like you said, they are coming off of a really emotional win against KU. And we saw them get a big road win against Colorado and then bounce back the next week and blow out West Virginia. But is that going to be the same thing here? I guess if you're going to put a dent in the armor for Houston's defense, it's that for the most part, they haven't really faced a good offense this year. KU as the exception, but even with KU, they mostly coasted off of some defensive touchdowns and things like that. We haven't really seen a ton. I guess you could maybe make Cincinnati the exception as well, winning 34-0, but K-State has one of, if not the best offenses in the entire Big 12. And where they have to be focused, though, against this Houston team, because if this team goes in to Houston unfocused, this game could very quickly snowball, I guess, is the way that I'll put it, particularly with a couple of individually talented defenders in particular, like Halsey. If we come out unfocused and let up a few early turnovers, then this is not an easy defense to move the ball against, so we don't need to dig a hole early.
No, and that to me is going to be the key of just making sure that you don't dig yourself a hole and don't let Houston sort of play themselves into the game, because that's kind of what happened in Utah. They sort of played themselves into that game, and they just sort of kept building up momentum. And you don't see that in a 17-14 victory, but they sort of just kept chugging along in a way that Utah didn't. And that's sort of one of those, you're not going. This isn't a team that's just going to break. If they haven't broken already, they're not going to. So, and to me, the next story to watch is very, very closely related, and it's who does K-State choose to get involved against this defense, and how do they choose to attack this defense? And to me, the obvious answer is stay the hell away from the middle of the field. So sorry, tight ends, at least on seam balls, you're probably not going to be your day. But to me, it's going to be a lot of running, and it's going to be a lot of sort of short screen passes to try and force them down. It's going to be like a very traditionally called game. At least that would sort of be the ideal.
Yeah, I think running the ball obviously makes a ton of sense here. But someone I think, or I think a group that could potentially have an interesting day, if nothing else, as the wide receivers, because I see this being a team where maybe we run a lot of curls and a lot of spacing. Because something that Keegan Johnson did really effectively, I think, against KU was find soft spots in the zone on his routes. He was running a lot of short hitches and spacing, and he did a pretty good job finding himself open. He got 9 targets for a reason. Didn't bring them all in, but this could be a really big week for someone like Keegan Johnson to just get consistent, not huge chunk plays, but just find soft spots in the zone, get us 7 or 8 yards. I could see that being maybe a big part of this game. That I imagine how we use the tight ends will be kind of similar. We've seen K-State really like to fit in short curls over the middle or short hitches right in the middle of the field for our tight ends here and there. We've kind of done that throughout the Kleiman era, really, but I think it's going to mostly be in the passing game, shorter stuff, but running the football, I could absolutely see some chunk plays coming from there.
So now we'll move on to projected offensive and defensive MVPs. Connor, you get to pick offensive MVP first.
I'm going to go with DJ Giddens. I think he's going to get back on track in this one. I was kind of tempted to go with Keegan Johnson just because of the routes that he was running against KU. And I figured that maybe it could be similar against Houston. But I think that this is a big opportunity for DJ Giddens to get back on track and just kind of remind people, I think, the quality of running back he is. Because I think there's been enough time with K-State being successful in the passing game that teams aren't going to be able to key in on it as much as, like West Virginia did, and KU to a certain extent. But I can absolutely see this being maybe a sort of get-right game for the K-State running game, because all the pass blocking and the passing offense as a whole has been really good the last couple of weeks. The running game, while having its moments, still has room to grow. So I'll roll with DJ Giddens here.
Solid pick. That probably would be my second pick, but my first pick is actually going to be Avery, because it sort of feeds into my if K-State wins which will be later. But one thing that Avery has proven that he's pretty good at, especially recently, is being very efficient in a way that is sometimes annoying. And I mean that from a defensive standpoint, because Avery just hasn't made too many in the way of abysmal mistakes when he's actually throwing the ball as of late. We're not going to talk about the reload cancel pump fake, as I think you and I will continue to call it forever. We're not going to talk about that. But Avery's been very, very efficient in the passing game these past few weeks. And I think against a team that is going to run a lot of zone coverages, is going to play a lot of off coverages, that's going to give Avery a really good opportunity to sort of play that point guard role that, he's sort of embraced as of late. And that's not to say that he's, Alex Smith, where, he throws everything he throws is short. He's still shown the ability to uncork a deep ball to keep defenses honest, but he's not letting the home run tendency get in the way of his first and foremost priority being protecting the ball. And I think that, this might be something that we talk about at the end of the year, no matter how the rest of the season goes. I think that's something that Matt Wells has really done an amazing job with him, because, if you look at the Pop-Tarts Bowl, Avery was technically efficient because every time that he was slightly challenged, he would just throw the ball away. No, now he's willing to extend the play and sort of find a guy short and make throws that he knows that he can make. I think that's probably one of the best things that Matt Wells has sort of introduced into Avery's game this year.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. You have the first defensive MVP then.
Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities here to pick a defensive MVP, especially against an offense that is statistically anemic, and I think that's probably being generous. I'm going to pick Austin Romaine, because I think a lot of what Houston is going to try and do, and especially what they've been doing as of late, is they're going to try and focus on that quarterback running game. And that's something that Austin Romaine has been very, very good at shutting down, not only the running game in general, but the quarterback running game. He will make it to where the quarterback doesn't really want to run anymore, because he's still, the lateral quickness is still there, and yet he's still able to deliver a really punishing hit. So to me, the really obvious pick is I believe for like the third week of the season, the reigning top-rated Big 12 linebacker.
Yeah, I mean that was going to be my pick. I guess it still will be, but I'm going to go ahead and just mention somebody else that I was thinking about instead, even though my pick is also Austin Romaine. So I'll mention my runner-up then, I guess, which is Brendan Mott. I think Brendan Mott, I can't remember who tweeted it. I saw someone tweeted that he currently is on the same pace for sacks as Felix was in 2021. Because Felix had 7 through 8 games. Brendan Mott's in the same boat. So Brendan Mott is looking at joining a very long list of K-State Wildcats that have made it to 11 sacks, but not 12. Because nobody's ever made it to 12 at K-State, but we've had tons of people make it to 11. So Brendan Mott is looking at finding himself in some actually fairly busy company, but still really impressive company. And this is, I think, a big opportunity for him to showcase some of his skills because there is a really good chance that he's going to be facing a very good pass blocker with Houston's left tackle, Duquette. So I think that Mott is a decent second pick here, but I think you're right, though. Austin Romaine, at this point, he's just kind of defensive MVP until proven otherwise, I think, based on how he's been playing. But really, there's a lot of guys I think that you could pick in this game.
Yeah. The other ones that I was thinking about was Siegel and VJ were my other two picks. But Connor, it's time for the moment that everyone has been waiting for. K-State wins if, and K-State loses if.
K-State is going to win this game if they don't overlook Houston, I think is the best way to say it. I think that this is a game that is easy to overlook. I don't think that Kleiman's like nominally bad at this, but I do think that sometimes the message doesn't get through. Like, I think Kleiman's fully aware of the importance of being focused every week, but we have had times where it does seem like we play an opponent and the message doesn't get through, and we either really struggle or even lose against an opponent that we probably should beat by more. But this team seems to have been, particularly since the BYU game, supremely focused and has, at least so far, not overlooked anybody. I mean, West Virginia, that was a great possibility for a letdown game. And K-State thoroughly controlled that game, particularly in the second half. So K-State did not overlook Houston and play to the fullest of their abilities. I mean, K-State's going to win this game.
Yeah. And K-State loses if?
I think K-State loses. They don't control the line of scrimmage. I think that this is a great opportunity the pass blocking has been really great throughout the majority of the season for K-State, but the run blocking needs to get back to what it was at various points earlier in the year. The last couple of games have been a bit more of a struggle at various points for the offensive line, and at times the tight ends as well. And run blocking, if K-State can control the line of scrimmage offensively, or if they don't control the line of scrimmage offensively, then this could be a potential struggle because this is a stout defense, but one area where we should definitely have the advantage is on the line. And if we let their defensive line get the best of us, then that's going to be a major issue, and that I think could really hold us back.
For me, K-State wins if they're able to jump on them early and just not let Houston get any hope or any momentum. So basically, K-State absolutely, this is a non-negotiable for me. They need to score on at least one of their first two drives, because if they don't, Houston's immediately going to be like, oh, wait a minute, guys, like we can do this. Like they're not coming out and they're not blowing the doors off of us already. We can hang with these guys. And a little bit of hope is a very, very dangerous thing to give a Willie Fritz team, because that's kind of what happened against Tulane at the last time we played them. Was we sort of, let them hang around for way longer than we should have, and we ended up losing. So to me, I even think that if K-State can jump out early and score on their first two drives, I genuinely think that they could probably eat a turnover if they needed to. I'm not saying that they should, but I'm saying that it's possible for them to do that if they're able to jump on Houston early. And K-State loses this game if basically they don't score in their first 2 drives. It's the exact inverse. K-State will lose this game if they let Houston sort of get the ball rolling, especially on defense. Because a formula for Houston winning this game is them getting a defensive touchdown, which, you always look at that. It's like, that's not particularly likely. No, this defense is more than capable of doing that if you're not being careful with them, especially with AJ Halsey at free safety. You can't afford to give them any hope, especially early. If we're able to shut them out in the first quarter, I will feel amazing about this game. But if K-State ends the first quarter tied with them, that's when I think you probably need to buckle up, because that's when things get scary for K-State. But
Yeah.
What is your score projection, Connor?
I've got K-State winning this one 38-3.
I think that Houston, I don't think that they're a more talented team than K-State. I do think that they're going to come out motivated and start trying to ride the momentum of the Utah game. But I still just don't think that they are there yet to beat K-State. They are more than capable of challenging K-State. So my projected score is actually going to be 28-10, which I think that might be the lowest point projection that I've had for K-State in quite some time. And that's just me tipping my hat to this Houston defense and giving them a lot of respect, because I think that they've earned that respect after getting dumpstered by just about everyone for the past 2 months. But this game does worry me. And like I said at the very beginning, this game would not worry me if it wasn't a Willie Fritz coach team.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I'm definitely a bit worried about that. So yeah, even though I do have a pretty optimistic score projection, I mean, this is absolutely a game that K-State could struggle in. But I guess outside of the game itself, K-State's getting Jason Benetti and Brock Heward on the call. First time, I think, since 2022 that's happened. I think those two. I think that's the best commentary crew in the game right now. I think Benetti's awesome because he does Tigers games as well for MLB. I think so. Great commentary crew. It's a middle afternoon game, so you'll have time to watch the 11 a.m.s, and then you'll have time to do something later at night. But
it's Big Boy Fox too.
Yeah, it is. It's another primetime slot for the gargantuan Wildcats. But unfortunately, bye week coming up. It's always kind of sucks. Whenever a bye week comes up, my weekend always just feels a little empty when there's no K-State going on.
Don't worry, we can record a Q&A episode then.
Oh, that's a great idea, actually. Yeah. So, we're thinking about your questions, everybody. Because we will have some time to answer them this upcoming bye week.
You have any final notes before we sign off, Connor?
Nothing else.
All right. Well, if that's the case, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I am at ACEdward00.
I am at Connor Baltazar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out both the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store and the supporters link, both found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.